Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Entropy is an interesting part of God's creation. Entropy refers to loss of energy due to disorder and chaos in a system. Power plants cannot extract all the available energy from water, coal, or uranium. Our bodies cannot extract all the energy available in the food we eat. Things are in a state of decline in the universe. We get old and die, and so on. That is entropy. Thus, the second law of thermodynamics states that entropy in a closed system can only increase. Disorder, chaos is always on the rise. In other words, disorder increases unless something is added from outside. The universe is a closed system by definition. For those paying attention, and for any honest scientist, this immediately casts all evolutionary theories in doubt, since they claim the opposite, namely that order increases in a system with each evolutionary step. Go figure. Evolution is nothing but a diabolical disorientation, and every honest scientist knows it is false, based on the second law of thermodynamics alone. In studying thermodynamics in college, the author of the book we use turned philosophical at the end of the chapter on the second law, stating, "A final point to be made is that the second law of thermodynamics and the principle of increase in entropy have great philosophical implications." He then explained that the universe is in a state of reduced entropy that does not match what we know is going on, and he wonders out loud if there is not a creator keeping it from blowing up or melting down. He adds, "The question that arises is, what is the future of the universe? Will it come to a uniform temperature and maximum entropy, at which time life will be impossible? In other words, it'll melt, something the scriptures say will happen at the end." He then concludes wonderfully. The author has found that the second law tends to increase his conviction that there is indeed a creator who has the answer for the future destiny of man and the universe. Indeed, there is, and indeed, he does have the answer. I bring up this because entropy, if we may use that word, is always on the increase all around us. We need God to intervene regularly to prevent our blowing up the world, so to speak, due to all the disorder and chaos sin brings. Don't you feel it now, about ready to blow apart? And so, not surprising to the faithful soul, throughout salvation history, the good God, the Creator, the loving Father, has indeed intervened to save us time and time again. He also sends his Holy Mother and other saints to do the same. And we, too, are to participate. And that's part of what it means to be Catholic. For our reflection this evening, one place we can find such intervention is the French monarchy. We ought to be interested in this monarchy for a couple of reasons. Because one, God clearly has taken special interest in it, preserving it from loss on a number of occasions. Number two, the revolutionaries hated it. And what they hate, we should love. Third, we have relics of St. Louis IX and Queen St. Clotilde on our altar. And they are of interest to us. And four, the great king that is prophesied to come will be French. He'll be of their line. God has his eye on France, the eldest daughter of the church. He saved the first French monarch, Clovis, his queen being St. Clotilde, from a disaster at war, when this pagan king finally called upon his maker for help and received a speedy reply. He soon was at the baptismal font. In fact, an echo of the Pentecost Sunday came upon France with the baptism of Clovis and 3,000 men by St. Remigius, who also anointed Clovis king with a vial of oil that came down from heaven itself. And this oil was used to anoint the kings of France until its devastation in the 1789 and following revolution. As everyone knows, God preserved this same monarchy from near ruin by sending St. Joan of Arc in 1430. Another time God delivered the monarchy from danger happened in the early 17th century when King Louis XIII, Louis the Pious, and his queen Anne of Austria were unable to have a child. Here, I think, we see a type of Alexandra and Tsar Nicholas II and their inability to have a child. Compare notes. It's amazing how close they are and how successful the Catholic is compared to the Orthodox. Well, Anne of Austria had lost 4 children in stillbirths. It was not looking good for France because the next in line was King Louis's dissolute brother, Gaston. What is more, entropy was increasing all around with the Protestant Revolution making inroads in France and the constant intrigues at court and in the empire. The time was ripe for divine intervention to prevent a meltdown. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Some of this damaging entropy came to the surface over a century earlier with the apostasy and revolution of Martin Luther in 1517. And those who would follow him, something had to be done to counter this disorder and preserve France, the eldest daughter of the church. And so, on the 10th of August, 1519, the Feast of St. Lawrence, in the Provence area of France, a woodcutter, John de la Baume, went up a hill near Contignac. He was alone. As usual, he started his day in prayer. As he got up from his knees, he saw a cloud from which appeared the Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus in her arms, surrounded by St. Bernard of Clairvaux, St. Catherine the Martyr, and St. Michael the Archangel. Both of these latter were the ones who helped St. Joan a century earlier, and St. Louis IX brought back the relics of St. Catherine to France from one of his crusades. Our Lady was standing with her feet on a crescent moon. She spoke to John, "I am the Virgin Mary. Go and tell the clergy and the consuls of Contignac to build me a church on this place in the name of Our Lady of Graces, and that they should come in procession and receive the gifts which I wish to bestow." Then the vision disappeared. Was this a hallucination? Doubtful or not, John kept the message to himself, which entitled him to a second apparition of this Mother of God and of Graces. Next day, August 11th, having gone to the same spot to finish his woodcutting, he had the same vision and received the same request. This time, he decided to obey and went back down to the village immediately. Known to be a sober and just man, the populace and their officials immediately believed the story of this pious and serious woodcutter. Amazingly, they did not delay much in starting, and providentially, an encouraging sign was to be given the builders. On the 14th of September, that is today, the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, a little over a month after the apparitions, the building work had started. Following a procession of the entire community, clergy, officials at the head, and municipal archives tell us the lay were following, the lay folk. It relates, and beginning to dig the foundations of the church, they found buried large quantities of skeletons, nails, metalwork, ivory boxes, and a ball of fine crystal, which suggested that these were martyrs who had been buried. It seems Our Lady once again picked a site that was significant on many levels, as many Christians had known to be martyred in that area for their faith. They found them. No wonder Our Lady came on August 10th, the Feast of St. Lawrence. Not surprisingly, the annals report that the tomb was opened. Several sick people were immediately cured, proving they were Christian martyrs. Ecclesiastical approbation was rapidly obtained, as already on the feast of St. Patrick, 17th March 1521, Pope Leo X issued a bull granting a series of privileges to the sanctuary of Provence. Soon the pilgrimages and processions greatly increased, such that by 1524 much effort had to be made to provide clergy and other helpers to manage the huge numbers. The shrine needed a stable religious community, and from 1586, the little community of priests around Canon Roland of Frere organized itself into a sacerdotal society attached to the oratory of St. Philip Neri, recently founded in Rome. Some years later, in 1619, this first house of the oratory in France joined the French oratory Cardinal de Bérulle had brought together in Paris. Returning now to King Louis the Pious, another saintly man was chosen by heaven to help with God's intervention. The pious king knew divine intervention was needed because he had experienced it himself a number of times. As a result, King Louis built the famous Shrine of Our Lady of Victories in 1629, the one that St. Therese would later talk about, and many miracles have been worked through, including some for herself and her family. This church was partly inspired by an appeal made by the Discalced Augustinians, known as the Little Fathers, who asked him for the money to build a new monastery on 3 hectares they had acquired in Paris. The king expressed the wish to have the church built there, dedicated and consecrated in honor of the Blessed Virgin, under the title of Our Lady of Victories. In recognition of all the success and victories he had won by her protection over the rebellious heretics and over the other enemies of his kingdom, and above all, in remembrance of the capture of La Rochelle over the revolting Protestants and threat of English invasion. On December 8th, the Cardinal Archbishop set the cross in place that year, 1629. And later, that next day, the king solemnly laid the foundation stone in the presence of the lords of the court and the city magistrates. Harmony between church and state was on display for all to see. Among these little fathers of St. Augustine at the shrine of Our Lady of Victories was a holy brother named Frere Fiacre. On 27th October 1637, while this saintly brother was in prayer with his fellow religious in the chancel, he had a sudden inner revelation. The queen should publicly ask that the people make 3 novenas to the Blessed Virgin, and a son would be granted to her. The first novena was to be offered at Our Lady of Graces in Provence, the shrine we just discussed. The second at Notre Dame de Paris, the cathedral. And the third at Our Lady of Victories, the church of his monastery. In fact, Brother Fiacre, 2 years earlier, as a young novice, had received the same inspiration, but with less conviction. Nevertheless, his superiors remained skeptical and refused him permission to even speak of it, unless he could have proof. 6 days later, on 3rd of November, towards 2 a.m., the pious brother, deep in prayer, heard the cries of a child. Astonished and afraid, he found himself before the Virgin Mary, showing him a crying baby in her arms. "Don't be afraid," she said. "I am the Mother of God, and the baby that you see is the prince which God wants to give to France." The vision disappeared, only to return a short moment later without further words. 2 hours later, Blessed Mary appeared again, but alone this time. She said, "Dispel any doubts, my child, in what you have told your confessor. To show you that I want the Queen to make 3 novenas to me, here is the same picture which is at Our Lady of Graces in Provence, a picture of herself on the crescent moon with child, His Majesty our Lord." And she showed him the appearance of the church itself. And Brother Fiacre saw that the picture in detail, as well as the choir where the picture was placed, as it is today. Immediately informing his superiors, who like him had never been to Coquignac, the consulted friends who had made the pilgrimage, the descriptions corresponded exactly On the 5th of November, a witness statement was drawn up and signed by the whole Augustinian community and sent to the Cardinal Archbishop, as these 3 novenas had become a matter of state. Soon informed, the Queen began to believe in the heavenly promises transmitted through this holy brother. Her husband also heard of it, but the opinion of the cardinal was the determining factor, and he was taking advice. Time passed. They hesitated. Entropy increased. But goaded on by a strong urge, on the 8th of November, 1637, Brother Fiacre began the 3 novenas in the name of the Queen. These finished on the 5th of December. The Queen found out, and as it was thus discreetly written in the biography of the Venerable Brother, precisely 9 months before the birth of the future King Louis XIV. In the first days of February 1638, the Queen felt the child moving inside of her and felt that she must get to know the famous brother. The humble monk was thus obliged to go to the Louvre, where, embarrassed and moved, he saw the Queen kneel in front of him and thank him. This showed him how profoundly Anne of Austria believed in the happy success of her pregnancy. Recall, she had 4 stillbirths. Since 1635, France had been at war with Spain and was allied to the empire. Remember, Spain was allied to the empire and was suffering serious military reverses with France, so the idea of dedicating the whole country to Our Lady was in the air. Louis XIII himself had already outlined various forms of consecration. Counseled by his confessor in November 1637, the text was at last submitted to the Parliament. It was signed by the king on the 10th of February, 1638, and registered as law. This is happening at the same time the brothers having the vision. It was the famous vow of Louis XIII, which would be celebrated each year on the Feast of the Assumption, as we shall hear. What therefore happened during this period? Father Cousin, according to his biography, persuaded the king to consecrate France as soon as the Queen's pregnancy was confirmed, not when he was born. In February 1638, this was done, the Queen having been pregnant for 2 months. Also, 3 days before the February 10th date, Louis had just sent to the sanctuary of Cotignac that barefooted Augustinian brother with his superior, so that Mass could be celebrated for 9 days, according to the royal ordinance, so that by the offering of a great sacrifice, it may please God to bless the pregnancy of his spouse, the Queen, with which all of France was hoping for, so that it may come to a successful conclusion. The start of the letter mentioned the great help that several pregnant women had received for successful conclusion of their pregnancies by the intercession of Our Lady of Graces. As the king and queen had absolute faith in the happy outcome, following the advice of their confessor to wait further before the issuing of the famous vow of Louis XIII, conceived as a thanksgiving, was to put all in doubt. Thus they did it. 3 days later, the king therefore signed this consecration, dedicating France to Our Lady. The pregnancy of Anne of Austria was a determining factor in the vow of 10th of February. More importantly, one should say that this consecration was a true and pious act of a Christian faithful king, of our Christian faith. The king begins this act, this vow, by recalling in a general way the various events in his reign that had been influenced by heavenly help, such as the division of his political enemies, the Protestant rebellion and the foreign wars. Then he declares, as he is unworthy to thank his heavenly king himself, he would take a mediatrix to thank God for him. She who has been the intermediary of the answers to his prayers. And this is why he adds, and this is from the letter that he signed, "To this end we have declared and we declare that, taking the holy and glorious Virgin Mary as special protectress of our kingdom, we particularly consecrate to her our own self, the state, our crown, and our subjects, and we notify the said Archbishop of Paris, and nevertheless order him that every year on the Feast of the Assumption, he should commemorate our present declaration at High Mass, which will be said in his cathedral church, and that after that day's vespers, a procession should be made within the said church, which will be attended by all the sovereign companies and the corps de ville, with the same ceremonials which are observed for the most solemn general processions. We also wish this to be done in all the churches, both in parishes as well as in monasteries, of the said town and suburbs, and in all the towns, market towns, and villages of the said diocese of Paris. We similarly exhort the archbishops and bishops of our kingdom, and nevertheless order them to have the solemn celebrations in their episcopal churches and others of their dioceses, being understood that as the said ceremony, the members of parliament and other sovereign companies and the principal officers of the town should be present, and to notify all the people to have a special devotion to the Virgin on that day, to implore her protection, so that under so powerful a patron our kingdom will be protected from all the wiles of our enemy and enjoy a good and lasting peace, and that God will be served and revered in such a holy way that we and our subjects may happily reach the final end for which we have all been created. Such is our wish. Signed, Louis, and given the 10th day of February, in this year of grace 1638, and the 28th of our reign. On the 5th of September, 1638, the heir to the throne was born, and she had other children after that. The royal couple considered him as a grace obtained from Our Lady of Cantignac, and named him Louis the God-given. Louis XIII announced the happy occasion to the ambassadors, saying in his letter, "All that preceded the delivery, the short labor, and all the circumstances surrounding the birth of the Dauphin show that this son is given by God through the intercession of the Holy Virgin." 4.5 years later, pious King Louis died, naming Anne of Austria regent of the realm, and which she was until 1661. Both of them, Queen Mother and son, were finally able to make a pilgrimage to the shrine on their way to sign the Treaty of the Pyrenees, making peace between France and Spain. King Louis later offered this treaty to Our Lady at that shrine by way of Brother Fiacre. Amazingly, heaven intervened again at Cantignac in the following month of June 1638, with an apparition of St. Joseph. It was promised to be a hot day. A young shepherd of Cantignac, Gaspard Ricard, aged 22 years, had herded his sheep when at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon the heat was stifling. Very thirsty, he lay on the rocky ground when suddenly a tall man stood next to him and pointed to the rock, saying, "I am Joseph. Lift it and you will drink." The rock was heavy. It would take a number of men to move it. How could Gaspard move it? But the venerable old man reiterated his instruction. The shepherd obeyed, and moving the rock, found fresh water beginning to flow. Immediately he drank eagerly. When he stood up, he found the man had gone. Without waiting, he went and took the news to the village, and the curious began to arrive. 3 hours after the event, in a place known to have no water, an abundant source was flowing freely. Not surprising, a chapel was built, and many, many pilgrimages, processions, and miracles followed. As a result, in 1661, Louis XIV declared March 19 to be a holiday. Soon the feast of St. Joseph was kept in all the French dioceses, and especially in Provence. Churches appeared which were consecrated to St. Joseph. After his pilgrimage to Cantignac and the apparition of St. Joseph, Louis XIV could hardly do less than consecrate France and himself to this great patriarch, spouse of Mary. After making a few more pilgrimages to the shrine of Our Lady of Graces, often on behalf of King Louis XIV, the venerable brother, Frere Fiacre, died on the 16th of February, 1684, leaving this testament. Very Holy Mother Mary, it was to the Church of Our Lady of Graces that I made the first pilgrimage to get a prince for King Louis XIII and Anne of Austria. who sent me to this holy place to ask for this miracle after 22 years of marriage without issue. This is why it is to the Holy Virgin of Contignac that I have signed with my purest blood this donation of my heart. And so the heart of this venerable brother was taken to the shrine and placed in the wall at the beckoning of the king. Entropy is always on the rise, with disorder increasing in the family, the country, the church itself, sadly. Without heavenly intervention, we will surely burn up or blow apart. But notice, it was through good men, working men, religious men, that God used to intervene and save the day for France and its royal crown. We must become those good men for our times, prayerful, virtuous, pious. And God will counter the revolution, the revolutionary entropy that is building to explosive levels. Although we will not know what could have been until the general judgment, nevertheless, one wonders what kind of a king Louis XIV might have been if his parents had obeyed heaven's request for 3 novenas instead of letting the brother do it for them. Perhaps we can conjecture that he would have been the one to obey heaven's request later regarding the Sacred Heart of Jesus to prevent the meltdown of the 1789 French Revolution. We also might conjecture that the great king that is to come will only come after good and great religious and laymen give their heart in life and in death to Jesus living in Mary.